Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Tsai. Welcome to the Toyota Solutions studio. I've got a big smile on my face because I'm so excited to meet a woman I've looked up to for a long time, actually. Michaela Angela Davis. She has an incredible pedigree in the magazine world, an editor at Essence magazine for years, but also a founding member of Vibe magazine and later Honey magazine, a magazine targeted toward young African American women. It's such a pleasure to have you in the Toyota Solutions studio.
Thank you.
The first thing I asked Michaela was whether she'd been a model, because you're such a striking woman. So, you know, at what point did you realize you were beautiful?
Oh, thank you. So I look the way that I do. I'm an American. And I'm an American in a very true sense, meaning that I'm the combination of so many cultures, immigrants, refugees, and I often identify as I'm the descendant of refugees from South Carolina. My grandparents escaped terrorism of Jim Crow South. They literally escaped the terrorism of the Klan and came up.
Refugees in their own country.
And the thing is, why I use that word, because it's very intentional, because we don't name it. We don't call the Klan terrorists. We don't call people who fled refugees, but that's the classic definition of a refugee, right? Is when you're fleeing enemy territory for your life and you take your family to try to live better. That's what the Great Migration was. It wasn't great, and it wasn't migration. It was Americans running for their lives, right?
And they were moving from the south to the north. Yeah.
So I love the way that I look because I have my ancestors in, like, my great-grandmother was Syrian. I have African on both sides. I have Irish. I have Native American. This is the result. And so I accept your compliment on behalf of my ancestors.
And you answered it in a deep, soulful way, and I would have expected no less.
Right.
This is not
Thank
a
you.
shallow woman.
Well, you know, I mean, the thing is, everyone likes to be called pretty. I had nothing to do with the way that I look.
That's true.
Right? So I didn't choose my bone structure. I didn't make my eye color. I didn't make my hair. Maybe I didn't mess it up. But nothing of my effort created how I look. So again, I accept the compliment on behalf of my ancestors and their bravery to decide to love and have children in a world that didn't want them to mix, right? And so, so though I like being complimented on, I like more being complimented on my choices, what I create, what I have done, but you don't know that till when you first meet someone. So, so thank you. But I think it's important because a lot of women who have a non-traditional face or a non-Eurocentric kind of look, which you do too, get cut out of that conversation if, right?
I actually said it because so much of your career has been spent in beauty and culture, and you know, certainly growing up as an Asian woman, I didn't have a magazine like Essence or Vibe, or you know.
Honey was for you. So
it was Honey for me too.
Yes. In its inception,
I was too old by that time.
I know, and then because we identified it was not for young black women, and that was the assumption. It was for, let's see, urban, smart, sexy, and stylish. And urban.
I have none of those things.
But you, I mean, you're equivalent, right? So the thing is, we probably there were a few European women that fit that. Like Pink was on our cover once, but we were really looking to move the needle, and particularly women of color who were living in urban areas in cities doing all this cool fly stuff, right? And so, and that were underrepresented. And so that's, you would be a Honey girl for sure.
Well, that's, I mean, I wish we had Honey.
I do too.
The point being that I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about beauty.
Yeah.
Obviously, that you are a woman of substance with ideas and a history, and social activism is a huge part of it. But image is also part of it. Why is image important? You know, so many of the women we've had in this studio in the last a few hours have been entrepreneurs. They're working on social justice issues. Why is image important?
Well, media is powerful, and that's why I identify as an image activist, even though I came from fashion and beauty, and I still love fashion and beauty, and I look at beauty as a culture. There is a huge, rich culture of beauty. It's like food, right? So in the way that people are obsessive and look at as food as an on-ramp into identity and culture, politics, to me, beauty is the same thing. You can travel the world. There are beauty practices, rituals, history, innovation, all of that in the beauty space, and also so many women participate in it. There's so much money. It's such a big industry, and also there's a lot of pride. There's a lot. You know, you talk to your grandmother and ask her, you know, what did she put on her skin, or how did she make do with her hairdressing? We have stories and history in beauty, and so that's why I'm very interested in the culture of beauty and the significance of beauty and beauty of women around the world, and it as an on-ramp to talk about women's identity, right? But the media, as we know, is so powerful, and so when I became an image activist, it was before Instagram and before Twitter, before there were all these open avenues where people could show what they were interested in and what they found beautiful independently. So it was very much an activist space, particularly for women of color, particularly for women who, you know, and my specific wheelhouse is Black women, but I feel like that we have a solidarity with a lot of women who are underrepresented, who are not white. And so at the time, whether it was music videos or the housewife franchises, Black women were shown in a very particular way, hypersexualized, emotionally violent, just whack. Yeah. You know, as a group. And if they were in a heroic space, they were alone and lonely. It was like one Oprah, one Olivia Pope. Right. And you were nowhere.
No.
Right. So let's.
I was like Lucy Liu, and that's it.
That's it. Yeah. So it was really, and the strategy was, and this is a strategy of any kind of, it's like, okay, let's get these people in the door first, and we're going to bring other people with us, right? So because Black folks were brought here for a specific reason, and we helped build the country, we thought, okay, we could push this along faster, right? Because of the numbers and because of the history, and this idea of why being an activist in the image space, in the media space, is important, because that's where we get our information. Yeah. That's where we get our ideas. That's where we shape culture, right? And particularly now. So it was important, and it was important for me to claim it and name it as something, that you're in there advocating for expanding the narrow narratives of women of color in media.
And to that exact point, two of the women that you have styled are kind of on different parts of the spectrum in some ways, style-wise. Oprah and Beyonce, right? So Beyonce is on stage and she's got the leotard and she's, you know, overtly sexualized in many ways, powerful. Right. Oprah, powerful, but in a very professional way. Let's just talk about the Beyonce thing, because I am so curious.
We can't have a conversation without Beyonce.
We can't. It's
just that part.
I'm so excited. Right. I want to hear what Michaela thinks about the intersection between power and sexuality and fashion. Yeah. You know, as a woman, you know, I'm sometimes like, you know, is that part of the power, or does is that the male sort of fantasy that I'm playing into? What do you think about?
Well, you know, Beyonce has a lot of agency, and that's the difference. Women can feel when someone decided how she was going to perform her sexuality, and whether she decided it for herself. We know the difference. It's an instinct, right? And so only you can decide whether you're fulfilling your imagination and fantasy or the male gaze. And it's even okay if you decide that you're doing it for men, but the deciding factor is you made the decision. Not that if I perform this way, I'll be accepted, I'll be loved, I'll be, you know, noticed. But this is how I choose to define myself today. And
that is it. That's it. Even if you decide to use your sexuality in a weaponized fashion, if you have the agency over it.
That's it. That's the only difference. So you can't. So that's why I don't really judge. I don't know whether someone like Stormy Daniels is like, that's her,
like, you know? Yeah, she likes to dress. Yeah.
Or that were her choices narrowed, because a lot of women who are over-sexualized or work in the sex industry, their choices are so narrow that they choose that to eat or to pay for their children. So I'm very interested in having women have like wide choices. So if they choose to be an exotic dancer, they're having fun, they're defining for themselves. And I think our sexuality has been used as a weapon against us, has us questioning, you know,
do I do this? Would I wear that?
So I think, and what's interesting, the one cover that I did with Oprah, she actually was wearing like a midriff and workout pants, and it was right after she lost all this weight, and she loved in that moment more skin and showing her body and showing that I did this, because there's also that part too, right? Like Beyonce works so hard. I've never seen any. She will run on a treadmill for 4 hours and sing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've seen her.
No, I saw her whole documentary.
Like,
I know she works hard. She has all the agency.
So those beautiful, strong thighs, she helped to create them. Or like Serena, those bodies that often are questioned in mainstream media are also the result of work and the result of taking up space.
Yeah. So that's always been obviously a huge part of your work, is being able to represent and have faces that are underrepresented in the media. One of the faces we hear about is just the older woman.
Yeah.
So like you wrote, you know, you're a young woman having to face misogyny and sexism in your younger years, and then you become an older woman where you finally have more agency and more wisdom, and now there's ageism.
Right, and then you disappear. That's what we were talking about on the panel, is that when you're at your most sort of vibrant and when you can contribute the most is when you're asked to go to pasture.
Is that
as
how
a woman.
You felt? I mean, you
know, I don't know. I'm just
you're in
it.
What, your 50s?
Yeah,
okay.
So I'm just in it, right? And so I don't know yet. Like, but I'm working for myself for the, first time in a long time, and I'm out, kind of in the market with media ideas. So it's very interesting because as I said, I'm interested in beauty in the same way that Anthony Bourdain is interested in food, right? And talking to people and using that as a way to talk about life and culture and identity. The older Tony Bourdain gets, the more rugged, cooler, sexier, like, that's a cool-ass guy kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not the same for me. Yeah. No, but I want to be able to disrupt that too. It's like, yes, that's why, when I said I identify as a grown woman, is that can also become something that is not just admirable, but like, oh, I can't wait to be that confident and that cool and that okay in my own skin and that irreverent, right? Because there's kind of an irreverence as a young person, as a teen, because you don't know any better. Yeah. And then there's a reverence when you get older because you don't give a.
It's like
it's so much fun.
Except when you're a teen, it's like disrespectful. When you're older, it's like you're a badass and you're wise.
That part. And the thing is, it's fun. And so part of what I think they were talking about too is I'm very interested in wellness because I want to be able to I want to be able to be a badass in a body that is going to show up for me. Yeah. So I do think it's important that we talk about health and wellness and radical self-care as we get older, because you have this greater brain and you don't want your body to break down just when you don't want the vehicle to break down when the engine is just at its hottest. Yeah. So I'm very interested now, more than ever, in wellness and radical self-care.
What is radical self-care?
So, you know what? Radical self-care is really putting yourself first, right? And so, it's hard, especially when you're a woman and you're supposed to do all these things. And my daughter is an independent woman now too, so I can let go of caretaking. But that caretaker gets embedded in you, and particularly whatever culture you're from. You're right, So, for instance, here's a little solution that I had: is that when I travel for work now, I add in a day. And whatever city I'm in, wherever I go to a spa, I get some kind of new treatment. I had this crazy Thai massage the other day. Like, my hands, she was twisting. I was like,
that was in New York?
Girl. No, it was in Sedona.
Oh, okay.
And so...
Those are great. They're like two women working you at the same time. Yeah.
And it's So, or, you know, what's the new superfood of that place? Or is there a yoga class? Or is there some kind of flotation tank? So I look at, so I built into my schedule, right?
Yeah.
This thing for me.
Right.
Or I get up and I take care of me first in the morning. And then I can get to work. Before I turn on the phone, before I turn on the news, I do something for me. Yeah. And so that's radical in the sense that women are saying, you know, if I take care of myself first, then I can handle everybody. Then I can, you know, I can be in the revolution. But we can't have a march if we can't walk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
I mean, it's like the basic building block is in sustaining wonderful, brilliant women is making sure they stay healthy.
That part.
I'm just curious, when you look back at like the arc of your career and your time at the magazines, do you think there have been great strides made among representation of Black beauty and other types of people as well?
Not fast. No, I mean,
no,
not fast enough. No. And the thing that I feel that is that has happened is that there was a time if you were a Black woman, you would only be on the cover of Essence, right? And things for now, Rihanna is on every, you know.
Yeah, you could be on Vogue or. Yeah.
So that is interesting because and helpful because I think other women need to know more about women of color. But we have less women of color on editorial boards than we did in the 80s.
Really?
Like who's making the decisions? Well, in terms of print media, it's shrunk.
Well, yeah.
But I don't think we see enough. It's happening. And because it's happening, and we have a couple of like heroes to like, here's Ava DuVernay, and here's Issa, and you have
but
like
you could name them in like one hand.
That part, right? And we still have Lucy Liu, right? And and there are no Indigenous Americans. Like there's some people that's just like we don't even, they don't even, you know. So
I mean, talk about invisible, you know, being invisible.
The actual first people that were here are invisible. So I think that the more women that get into decision-making spaces, because I do think we bring more people with us inherently, and that we can. I mean, look at the Women's March. I worked on the Women's March.
You did.
The so you have Bob, who's a white woman, Linda, who's a Muslim, Carmen, who's Mexican, and Tamika, who's a Black woman.
Yeah.
That's why it was the largest single-day march in the world, because you had all this representation, and you had intersectionality, and you had women who come to the table, and it wasn't easy, but who would come to the table and bring other people with, and someone say, what about trans women? What about this one? That doesn't happen when it's an all-male experience. They don't go, where's the woman?
Yeah.
You know?
It also reminds me of the student march that took place after the Parkland shooting, in that, you know, you can't just have this be about white suburban high school
The Women's
students.
March modeled that for them.
Yeah.
Right? Because the Women's March, again, the largest single-day march in modern history, was very intersectional, but what preceded that was Black Lives Matter. So there had been a movement for Black lives for 5 years.
Were you part of that as well?
Yeah,
well, organization. I mean, the organizing.
Not so much organizing, more representing it on CNN and talking about it and being on the ground and hoping to bring their issues into the mainstream space. So that was my position, right? And I did that a lot on CNN and talked about Black Lives Matter. But this has been a sustainable, mostly Black and brown youth movement for 5 years before the Women's March. So the streets were hot, and this idea of uprising was happening because of the movement for Black lives. Then the Women's March built on that, and then the Students' March. So we've been modeling. We just celebrated 50 years of the Civil Rights Movement, right? So America has this extraordinarily brilliant blueprint for how to make social change and how to affect policy. And so now we're just building on that. And because we have Instagram and Twitter, it's faster, it's global, it's more intersectional, because people can connect differently. So that's the part that gets me up in the morning, that gets me hyped. Like, you know, that this is a moment, particularly for women, and centering women of color is critical, because we have more information than anyone. Right?
There are so many issues that were thrown, and I attended both women's marches, but there were so many issues that come up. Is there ever a concern that there's sort of issue fatigue, and that, you know, I feel, you bring up King, and he was assassinated 50 years ago this year, and that there was a pretty focused agenda. Is that a concern? Should that be?
You know what? I love that this is a leader-full movement, and that there are a lot of issues on the table. At that time, it was so critical because we have to grow with society.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that people weren't ready for. I feel like if everyone finds their lane, that one thing that they're passionate about, we could work on a lot of things at one time. And that's the challenge of this day, is to hold competing truths. To be able to understand that it's not this or that, that is this and that. And most of us live that life internally and interior, but on the outside it's like you have to be Christian or Muslim, or you have to be, you know, Trump or liberal. And often there are complexities in that are both true.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like women and women of color understand that more than most, because we've been cultured to have to negotiate several spaces at the same time for generations.
Yeah.
But I do feel, I'm excited that there's a lot of issues going on at the same time, so also we can have some solidarity.
Yeah.
Right? So we can bring in LGBTQ issues while we're working on women's issues, while we're working on environmental issues. Because
it's a big tent.
Well, because it's an ecosystem, it's humanity, it's intersectional, and my destiny is linked to yours. And the more that we see how where our issues connect, we can understand that. Because a lot of folks go, oh, that's just a black girl issue, or but if you drill down, there's connectivity. And that's the only way we're really going to move forward, if we do find where we do connect and then and move forward.
So we started the ageist conversation with you talking about this notion of invisibility, which I've heard from other women, especially when they get into their 50s and 60s, that they feel like they all of a sudden become invisible. But it occurs to me that you have such a huge voice at this point. I mean, do you have plans to, you know, amplify that even more?
Absolutely. And I decided that when I did back when Tumblr was hot, I did a page, 50 Days to 50, and I really talked about what I was going through, and I decided I was either going to lean in, like, you get to this point, like, are you going to do it, or are you going to be one of those women that don't say, oh, don't ask me my age, darling, right. Like, no, we don't talk about it, it's gauche, or are you going to tell the truth? And, you know, and prior to turning 50, people would ask me, when do you feel most beautiful? What's beautiful about you?
Yeah.
And I said, I feel most beautiful when I tell the truth. And so I was confronted with, am I going to tell the truth? And then I was like, yeah. And then it felt great. And also I had, you know, my mother looks great. I think that has a lot to do with it too. My mother's 80, she looks flawless, she's great, she's healthy.
Right.
So that gave me some courage. But I intend to be very overt about my age as I do these more public things, right? So hoping to, the same way I feel like I was having a voice for black women or young women or urban women or hip hop, like going back, that this can be another layer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Michaela Angela Davis, you are an extraordinary voice.
Thank you.
For women of all kinds, and it's really been a pleasure to have this time with you.
It's mine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.